This saved the United States, and it saved the First Amendment, and I think it saved freedom in the world. Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of the press never had a better friend than Thomas Jefferson. In the 1780s, Jefferson made a statement that's become pretty famous. He said, given the choice of a world in which we have governments but no press, or a world in which we have press but no governments, I would, without hesitation, choose the latter. And of course, people have sarcastically commented, well, this was in the 1780s before Jefferson became president. How did he feel after he was in the White House? But the answer to that question is provided in a letter that Jefferson sent to the Comte de Volnay in 1802, in which Jefferson reiterated his view about the need for a strong, vigorous, independent press. He furthermore said he had no illusions about the press. He knows the press publishes falsities, calumnies. They're not much better than anything else that you wrap yesterday's fish in. But he said what a democratic society must do, and this is really crucial, is safeguard the right of the press to print falsities. Because in doing that, you safeguard their ability to print the truth. And so for the next 100 years, we had a sort of golden age of freedom of press in the United States. Andrew Jackson became president in 1828. He was a Jeffersonian. He extended the democracy to what was called the common man in those days. Increases in the technology of printing, improvements in that technology led to more newspapers being printed. By the 1840s, magazines were joining books and newspapers. That's the media ecological side of this picture. By the 1880s, literacy in the United States was so high that it equaled for the first time the rates of literacy in the ancient city of Alexandria. It's a really sobering thought, isn't it? It took us that long to get up to where the ancient Alexandrians were. But you may know that the ancient city of Alexandria, and especially its library, which was reputed to have a copy of every book ever written. I was thinking of going back there in a time machine and giving them some of my books just to make their collection complete. But it was burned to the ground no fewer than 3 times. And so although the 1880s seemed to many Americans to be a golden age for freedom of the press, and I should also mention Lincoln during the Civil War, who also considered himself a Jeffersonian, and with a few minor exceptions, permitted the Northern press to be extremely critical of his conduct of the Civil War. So Lincoln refrained from sabotaging the press. But just as the Library of Alexandria was burned to the ground, it would turn out that in the 20th century, the First Amendment, while not being burned to the ground, would meet very severe challenges. So now we'll move on to page 2. Don't worry, there are only 3 pages to this story today. Page 2, 1901. McKinley, President of the United States, is assassinated by some nutcase anarchist, I think in the city of Buffalo. The only thing that makes sense about that is that it happened in Buffalo. Unlike Lincoln's assassination, which, horrific as it was looked at by most Americans, and I think correctly so, as just another last gasp of the Civil War, Americans had a hard time understanding McKinley's assassination. And unfortunately, the explanation that a lot of people came up with is that these anarchists are being fed by the press. They're reading all of this material that's inciting them to go on and do these horrible things. And so a sort of distrust of the press began slowly permeating American society. In the year 1915, a little noted but very important Supreme Court decision came down in a case involving a company called the Mutual Film Company. What that decision was all about was that the justice who wrote that opinion, one McKenna, was his name, an appointee of William Taft, said that motion pictures are not entitled to any First Amendment protections. They're just another business. That's like a direct quote from that Supreme Court opinion. Just another business, and they're entitled to no more protection than a shoemaker, or today we might say a pizza place. And this was also pretty serious because it made a very crucial distinction. It seemed to be saying, well, newspapers were entitled to First Amendment protections, but other media were not. So unfortunately, McKenna was never able to take any courses in the media ecology program. Never had the benefit of Neil Postman's education because he was, writing his opinions 50 years earlier. But the really damaging blow to the First Amendment happened in 1919 with the famous clear and present danger decision. This involved a man by the name of Schenck, who was distributing anti-draft leaflets near a draft recruitment center during World War I. He was arrested. His defense was the First Amendment. The Supreme Court, under Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., ruled 9-0 that Schenck was not entitled to the protection of the First Amendment, and that notwithstanding the First Amendment, Congress had not only a right but an obligation to prevent actions which would lead to a clear and present danger to life, property, and they threw a couple of other things in there as well. Ironically, Justice Holmes thought he was a champion of the First Amendment. He thought this was necessary to sort of, throw, to use McLuhan's metaphor, a piece of juicy meat to the dogs that were about to beset the First Amendment. Who knows what he really thought, but he was certainly dead wrong, because what this then did is it opened up the floodgates. Rather than satisfying people who were against the First Amendment, it only emboldened them. In the 1930s, the Federal Communications Act created the Federal Communications Commission, and you can see right there the profound dichotomy of an already weakened First Amendment and the attempt to desperately hold on to some of it. Because in that act, it says on the one hand, in one of the clauses, that the FCC has no right and shall never censor content on radio. Fair enough. But then it also says someplace else that it's going to make sure there's no obscenity broadcast on the public airways. What is obscenity? No one ever defined it. Unsurprisingly, in the years since the FCC, not only obscenity, but indecency has sort of been brought into that realm of what the FCC is supposed to regulate. A few other highlights of the 20th century before we get to page 3. Late 1970s, a man is riding down, I think it was the Sawmill River Parkway in Westchester with his son, his 11-year-old son, almost 12. They're listening to WBAI FM radio. As some of you know, it's still the Pacifica radio station. And on the radio, that instant, is George Carlin's 7 Dirty Words routine. And I'm happy actually to bring this example here again because it gives me the chance to say the word ass again. I mean, I was thinking of subtitling the talk, The Ass of John Adams Through History, but anyway, what the 7 Dirty Words routine is all about are words that you can say on radio because they're double entendres. You can say on television, of which ass is an example. You can say he came down from the mountain with 3 asses. That's fine because it could be like 3 donkeys. But then there are certain words that I won't mention here because who knows who might arrest me. But there are certain words that you can't say, and you all know what they are. They're not double entendres, they're single entendres. They mean only one thing, and Carlin listed 7 of them. Actually, he eventually expanded his list to over 100, very creative guy.